Richard, and thanks everybody for coming. So as Richard said, I'm just going to talk about the work that I've been doing recently. I've had one opportunity to do this at Fremantle just before I left, but I'm now, this is the first time I've kind of talked to a wider audience about it. So let me start by just sharing my screen. Sorry, I'm just going to do that again because I didn't click on the sound option. Include sound screen. Okay, does that look like a slide?
It does. Looks good.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so sustaining freelance careers in TV, and this is a particular project that I want to talk about today. I thought I'd start with this because it's one of the highest rating factual entertainment shows in the UK. It's now in production of its 19th season, made by Talkback Thames, one of the labels of the super indie that I've been working with, Fremantle. And I want to start with this image because the theme of this talk is talent. And yet, ironically, as an industry, we don't actually look after our own talent very well. And the reasons for this relate to the employment model on which the industry is now based. As I'm sure you know, TV is heavily dominated by highly skilled but short-term project workers or freelancers. On a show like BGT, which will employ probably over 500 people across a production cycle, perhaps just 3 or 4 of them will actually have staff contracts. Everyone else, from the series producer down to the day runners, will be freelance. And so the work I've been doing at Thames and across other Fremantle labels has been to develop an intervention that in a small and specific way can provide better support for the talent behind these shows. In this respect, I have to say that Fremantle has been well ahead of the curve in setting an example for the industry. And I'm very grateful to Amelia Brown and Ewan Winnicombe-Wallace, my collaborator on this project, who have been incredibly supportive of this initiative and a commitment to improve the work culture of the industry. Before I get into the detail of the project, I think it's useful to give a bit of background and context. The work that we've been doing here in Bournemouth, focused on media employment and careers, really began about a decade ago with curiosity about the career development of our own students. We wanted to know if we were doing a decent job in preparing them for work in the sector and how we might improve our own degree programmes. And so we started off by talking to recent graduates, those that were 5 years out of uni, because we knew that the first 5 years can be very rocky in career terms, and we were interested in how people made those first steps into the industry, who survived and who didn't, and crucially, what made that difference. We then got the opportunity to talk to the class of 1995, graduates who at the time of our study were in their early to mid 40s. And what we learned from them caught us by surprise because we discovered that in fact, most of these graduates had initially found work in the industry and many had made it through those critical first 5 years. But around half had then left the industry by the time we spoke to them. And this was something that wasn't being much talked about at the time. There was a huge policy emphasis on the need for recruitment, getting the right skills, and the need for broader access routes, all focused on how the so-called talent pipeline was being fed and was often a thinly disguised dig at media courses. But nobody seemed to be noticing the fact that this pipeline was seriously leaky. And so we started pointing out that maybe some of the skills gaps that employers at the time were reporting to us on a regular basis should be addressed not just by recruiting new talent, but by hanging on to the talent and experience that it actually already had. And so this led us to begin to explore the reasons that people drop out of the industry. And you'll be aware of some of the themes now more widely talked about that characterize work in this sector: precariousness, financial insecurity, the challenges of combining work with family commitments, and issues of personal well-being. During COVID, as you may remember, people started talking far more openly about working conditions in TV and issues of work-life balance, well-being, mental health. People who had always loved their work also started talking about leaving the industry. At that time, we undertook a study for BEC2, the union, in which we surveyed nearly 1,200 people working across unscripted, and we produced this State of Play report, State of Play 2021. We concluded that despite the many wonderful people working in the sector, there were a lot of very poor management practices contributing to the negative experiences that people were reporting. One of the most concerning was the experience of bullying, with a staggering 93% of people reporting that they had witnessed or experienced some form of bullying or harassment. And we came to the conclusion that this was primarily a result, not so much of individual bad apples, but of normalised management practices and structural issues within the industry. We then went on to interview 30 exec producers and heads of production to better understand the challenges they faced in trying to be good managers within this particular business environment. And subsequently, we went on to undertake a study to understand the experiences of production management. In all of this research, one theme kept coming up over and over again: support. People told us that one of the things they find most difficult in their job is that they don't feel supported. And on the whole, they're not talking about money or formal structures so much as their relationship with their boss and with their employers. Freelancers often report feeling disposable, not valued, that they have no sense of whether they've done a good job, and no time or space to share their ambitions or for a constructive conversation about where they should be heading next. And so about 3 years ago, I secured a small research grant from the BFI, matched with some internal university funding here, for a project that I called Mid-Career Support for People Working in TV. I set out to talk to people in industry leadership roles to explore the sort of practical interventions they thought might help to address this lack of support. And this led me back to a reconsideration of some well-established HR type practices that are standard in more conventional employment settings, but are extremely rare in the context of short-term contingent work. My question was simply, what can we take from some of these practices that we could adapt and then apply to a freelance environment? And what I proposed, as set out on the right-hand panel of this illustration, is what you can see described here as a modest, specific and practical intervention at the point at which a worker's contract is coming to its end, something between an appraisal, an exit interview and a career conversation. Everyone said, yes, that's a great idea. But nobody, in fact, was very up for partnering with me to actually make it happen. Happily, that changed. I developed a very productive working relationship with Fremantle, and in March 2024, thanks to a British Academy Innovation Fellowship, I began work on what I now refer to as supportive offboarding. And so the findings that I'm about to relate are a consequence of this one-year project to design, develop and then test an intervention to support freelancers at the point at which their contracts are coming to an end. This illustration sets out the intervention's key elements. So on the left are the 4 concepts or ideas that the approach is based on. First is the recognition that this liminal phase towards the end of a contract often marks a moment of anxiety and vulnerability, and where a gesture of support would be keenly felt. Second is the notion of ethics of care. Irrespective of any business case for the industry to look after its workforce, which of course there is, there's also a moral imperative for them to do so. Third is the notion of perceived organisational support, which is borrowed from organisational support theory. In a nutshell, this emphasises that how people believe an organisation views and values them is directly correlated to both their performance and sense of well-being, including their mental health. And fourth is pragmatism. Budgets are tight, time's limited, people are busy. Ideas that appear impressive on paper may not be feasible in practice. So it was my determination that whatever this intervention might ultimately become, it should be both practical and actionable. And then to the right of these driving ideas are the four key elements or pillars of the intervention as we've developed it. So the expression of gratitude, feedback from the employer, feedback for the employer, and a career conversation. And then along the bottom of the illustration, you can see the process we developed. So offering freelancers the opportunity to have a supportive conversation with a facilitator, an arm's length facilitator from the company. And for this purpose, we created a set of resources. Central to this is a structure for a supportive conversation consisting of 12 key prompts for a facilitator. Part of that resource pack included a video. I don't want to play you the whole video, but I think it would be helpful just to play you the first 5 minutes because it will give you a real insight into how this is actually conducted, what it looks like in reality. So if you bear with me one tick, I'm just going to skip across to this screen and I'm just going to play you literally the first 5 minutes of this.
Katie, thank you so much for meeting me today for your reach out conversation. This is part of a process that we're bringing into Fremantle to see how we can kind of value our team better and the people who...
Can we do that again?
Yeah, sure. So I need to
share again.
Yeah, sorry.
With sound, include sound.
Thank you. Is that
yes? So
looking like something?
Yeah, that looks good.
Hi Katie, thank you so much for meeting me today for your reach out conversation. This is part of a process that we're bringing into Fremantle to see how we can kind of value our teams better and the people who work on our shows. Because actually without you and without all the people making our programmes, Fremantle and other production companies, we wouldn't have shows and then we wouldn't be in business. So that's kind of why we're doing it. When I started out developing this supportive offboarding process with Bournemouth University, I wondered why it didn't happen in the industry already. And I think in pockets it does, and I think in different teams it does, but I think as an industry standard, maybe it doesn't as much as it can do. Hi Harriet, how are you today?
Hi Ewan, I'm good, thank you.
And thank you so much for joining me for our reach out conversation. I hope you find it a really useful 20 minutes. There's 4 key elements really to it that we think will really value the individual and the company. So one is giving the opportunity for feedback to the individual about their time working on one of our productions. It's also a chance for that individual to give us feedback about what it was like to work for Fremantle and particularly within one of our labels or on a particular production. It's also a chance for us to talk to them about their career development and kind of where do they see themselves and how can Fremantle maybe help them on that journey, or when they come back to Fremantle, could that lead to new opportunities for that individual? And then finally, it's just a chance to say thank you, because we all know the pressures of television production at the moment and that sometimes people finish their contracts on the day of the studio or on location, and so you don't get that chance to reflect, and actually this is a chance for us to reflect and actually say thank you to those individuals. A chance to give you feedback to us as a company to see if we can... So before I confirm the final meeting with them, what I do is I send them a list of 10 questions, really simple, just to prompt their minds and think about kind of review their time working on the show, which then we can talk about in the reach out meeting. To start off with, everything you say in this room is confidential. I won't tell anyone about it. I may discuss some themes with people that I'm talking to loads of people across the business, but I won't ever attribute anything to you unless you want it to be attributed or you want me to follow up with something. We start off by talking about the confidentiality side of the conversation, so that if the individual wants to raise certain points with me, they can. If they want me to take them further into the production teams or talk to senior management, I can do that on their behalf. With this process, everything they tell me, I do make notes, but I don't pass on those notes verbatim to the labels or the senior managers. And what I do is I distill all the information and spot themes or common occurrences, and then pull that feedback together to then give the label or the production or the senior managers like a good overview of the general experiences of the team. So we do really protect everyone's confidentiality, because what we do need to do is people need to be part of this process, and we don't want to break that trust. On behalf of Fremantle and behalf of the production company you've been working for, just to say like a really big thank you, because without you and without people like you and without all the people on your team, I know they've been working really hard on the show that you've been doing, without you Fremantle wouldn't exist, because we are a production house, we make shows, you're such a big part of the company, and so we just really want to say thank you. So when we set out supportive offboarding, we didn't want it to be a place where it was in a negative environment. We really wanted it to be a really positive, forward-thinking conversation, which actually then means that the individual leaves the company in a really good way, thinking actually the company do really respect me and actually want me to develop my career. Obviously, some topics that we might discuss might be quite challenging for those individuals. We want to start in a positive light, because most people, when they come to work, do a really good job, and so actually we want to celebrate that. What's been really great when I've been having the conversations, and I've done so many conversations in my time at Fremantle, is that when I actually say thank you on behalf of Fremantle and then on behalf of the label, and then they get their feedback, the amount of smiles on people's faces, it's just incredible to have someone who's kind of a bit stepped back from their day-to-day process within their company, and having someone saying thank you on behalf of the company really does mean a lot. How did you find working on the show? Like, how was it for you?
It was great. I mean, it was busy, it was a challenge, but I'd definitely say it was very rewarding.
And in challenging terms, is it kind of the schedule? Was it the location? Was it the kind of team dynamic?
I would say all of the above, but no, predominantly it's just, yes, schedule-wise, just trying to, make everything happen in the time that we...
Feedback is just part of the development process, and without feedback, people can be kind of not sure if they've done a good job or not done a good job. And actually, the things with feedback is you can be challenged with feedback, but you learn from it. And so I think feedback in part of this process is really, really important.
Really nice to hear that people have come back from previous.
And actually, I've been surprised in a very positive way that when I've requested feedback from individuals across Fremantle, it's come back within a day or two of me requesting it. And these people are really busy people running big programs, working really hard, but actually they still want to take out time to give feedback to these individuals. So I think it's a really integral part of this process.
It's hard.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there, but you get the idea, hopefully, of what an intervention would look like. So just a very quick word about methodology and approach. So I've drawn heavily on action research, so qualitative, inductive and interpretive. We kept clear blue water between the facilitator and their confidential meeting with the participant and my research interview with each of them after the event, also of course confidential. This iterative design, develop, test process was structured in 3 phases over 10 months. It began with the initial testing being undertaken by my main collaborator, Ewan, de facto the first facilitator. And we trialled this initially with 8 participants, representative of a range of factual entertainment shows across Fremantle's UK labels. I interviewed each participant after their meeting, and I interviewed Ewan after each of these interviews. The second phase was facilitated by Fremantle's UK talent team and involved a larger sample. And the third phase continued this testing process, but with the addition of several variables for comparison, including its application to those working in scripted. This was on the show Neighbours at Fremantle, Australia, sadly now terminated. Overall, participants represented the full gamut of freelancer contracts from 10 weeks and upwards across both production and editorial, from trainee runner to series producer. I also interviewed several gatekeepers for further insight into broader contexts. So I'm going to just talk you through my findings related to these kind of 4 pillars of the intervention. Gratitude is an important aspect of our commitment to strengths-based management. So the focus is on people's strengths rather than the more traditional approach of just solving problems or troubleshooting. It's about building on people's strengths and managing weaknesses rather than negating them. When gratitude is expressed and encouraged, we know it builds trust and a culture of respect and collaboration. You won't be surprised to hear, I don't suppose, that the expression of gratitude on behalf of the company hadn't been expected. It was universally appreciated, and crucially, by saying thank you at the start of the session, it set a positive tone for the conversation that followed. This is a typical comment. I thought it might be about kind of negative things, but actually I was really pleasantly surprised that the nature of it was very positive, and I thought that was a really good thing. Similarly, when later in the conversation participants were asked if they wanted the facilitator to convey thanks to people that they had worked with, the response was widely taken up. One participant commented, "It felt nice to share what was positive about specific people in the team because, well, I just think not enough people get told that they're doing something really good that's made such a difference to someone's experience, and that's always worthwhile sharing." Commenting on one particular conversation, the facilitator recalled to me being given a long list like the Oscars of people to say thank you to. The expression of gratitude then made space for meaningful acknowledgements in both directions, and like oil in the machine, it helped the conversational flow in a positive direction. The option to receive feedback from the company, which was an option, was widely taken up, and for most of those I spoke to, it had been an entirely new experience. Once you've finished that filming, you're gone, and you sometimes don't return to the next series and you wonder why, like whether they've just gone for someone else or there was something you did on the previous job. Feedback really matters to people. Participants expressed a huge sense of relief in simply having it confirmed that they were doing fine. Absence of feedback creates a cycle of insecurity, and not just among the young or inexperienced. It extended to very experienced operators. Despite clearly being highly proficient and well thought of, one participant described to me what he referred to as his own imposter syndrome. The quality and substance of the feedback given varied. The best kind of feedback had been specific and personalised. I had some comments on like improving my confidence to talk to senior people on the team and the execs. So I think going forward, I'll have that in the back of my mind. It's good to know it because I'd rather know so that I can work on it. I got feedback on how I handled a particular guest mentor who's been a bit difficult. And I think that specific kind of feedback is always helpful because it's kind of like, okay, I did handle that situation good, even though it was a difficult one. Feedback was often brief and sometimes superficial. It rarely contained any great surprises for the recipient, and in many cases, it had simply confirmed a few things. However, despite variations in quality and level of detail, all feedback was welcomed by participants, and any feedback was preferable to no feedback. Typically, it didn't go into immense detail. It was just sort of headlines about, being professional, working well as a team. And that's all you can ask for, really, as a freelancer, to know that you did your job to the best of your abilities and that there were no complaints at the end of the day. The option to request feedback hadn't always been taken up. This was sometimes because of an oversight or lack of engagement in the process, and sometimes for other reasons. Those in more senior roles were notably less inclined to ask for feedback, knowing it would come from peers or people whose opinions they felt they already knew, or who they felt might be too busy to give it the necessary time. But a number of those who had declined the offer were clearly conflicted about having done so. "I'm desperate for feedback," said one. "I say it all the time. I would love to have some kind of structured feedback." This is somebody who declined it. Another said, "I guess at the time it didn't necessarily feel like something that I needed, but on reflection, I feel like in the future I would." Whether or not people asked for feedback, the proactive offer of feedback had been noticed and appreciated. And it was particularly appreciated by those who said they would have been reluctant to ask for it themselves. The fact that their feedback was being delivered by someone who had not been closely involved in the show was generally considered to being of equal merit to the alternative. So I think if I did have this conversation with someone on the team, that would also have been useful. It just would have been a very different conversation. In at least one case, it was the conversation with the facilitator that had directly prompted a subsequent conversation with the line manager. After the chat, I went and spoke to my boss and we had a little catch up about it. So I did kind of get both versions, if that makes sense, because I wouldn't naturally maybe have the confidence to go and ask, hey, please give me some feedback on what I've done. Whereas this kind of sparked that conversation. As another participant commented, a third party conversation like this ought to complement rather than be an alternative to a team debrief. The third party aspect of the conversation also seemed to have had some symbolic value. Sometimes, you know, you're working loads and loads and you feel like they're not even noticing or appreciating what I'm doing. And then for them to like write it and say, look, I've noticed it, we see you and we see that, that was quite validating. Contrary to early fears, feedback didn't appear to be too difficult to get. In a couple of cases, it hadn't arrived in time, in which case it had been forwarded after the event. It was clear overall, although not everyone requested feedback, there was an overwhelming consensus that the offer of feedback was welcomed, and when given, it was seen as meaningful, irrespective of its quality. Any and all feedback was better than none, or as one participant put it was just nice to get it, full stop. It was clear that freelancers seldom get the opportunity to talk about their own career aspirations. Attention is always the current project and the next contract. I think day to day, we're often in this industry so busy thinking about the production and focusing on the needs of production that we don't necessarily take much time to consider our own circumstance or our own career development. I think it's quite difficult to build that into our day to day. And so I think I found the pause, having a moment to pause and think and reflect on it, really, really useful. The constant need to be the best fit for an immediate job opportunity was a continual disincentive to focus on what one wanted for oneself. I think so often I'm not really thinking long term. I'm thinking, oh God, my contract finishes in a week and I just need to find work. First and foremost, at the top of my head is, at the moment, where's my next contract coming from? Where's the money coming for the mortgage? Rather than realistically, where do I want to be in 5 years' time? The opportunity to discuss career and development needs was widely welcomed, albeit this part of the conversation was relatively superficial and by no measure would constitute formal career counselling. One or two of those who had spent time preparing for the conversation expressed mild disappointment that they had had such little time to actually talk about it. Nevertheless, the listening ear, the occasional insight or tip based on the facilitator's own industry experience, or the offer to make an introduction had meant a great deal. I think it was really useful, and to hear from someone who had also a quite different experience to me, I think was very valuable as well. And you know, there was a couple of people who he pointed me in the right direction to in Fremantle who I might not have known about. As a freelancer, sometimes you feel like it can be quite a competitive industry, but to have somebody to sort of say, no, I think you're doing the right thing, and from a personal perspective, I know people who have done this, or maybe signpost courses and other sort of areas that I could look into in the future. I thought that was really helpful. This aspect of the intervention then was generally thought to have been, quote, very helpful and positive and clearly effective in terms of perceived organisational support. For the more junior participants, the practical aspect of this career-related part of the conversation was especially appreciated. It was really good to get tangible feedback of what can I actually do, rather than just go, oh, you should see if they're hiring, because I've tried that and no one replies to my email, so I don't know what to do. So getting actual, I will see you in with this person or send you a link to this course is really helpful as practical steps. Not all conversations included this kind of advice. In many cases, this aspect of the intervention had consisted of little more than a few minutes of attention, recognition, and affirmation. Despite the limited time it was given, it had provided a reminder to think about their career more broadly. Being asked to give the company feedback initially had sparked some skepticism, but this seems to have faded as participants became engaged in the process. Feedback from participants in most cases seems to have been positively constructed, often involving comparisons with the way things are done in other companies. It wasn't necessarily that I had anything kind of massive to contribute, but there were a few things that I thought from experiences with other companies might be quite useful. You know, certain working practices when I've worked with other companies, and I was like, actually, that would be quite handy if it happened at Fremantle. So hopefully it felt like I could contribute those ideas and they might have an impact on other employees further down the line. Several facilitators commented that this part of the conversation had yielded some particularly useful insights and suggestions. Nevertheless, there was evidence of caution in this part of the conversation, and sometimes clearly self-censorship. There were comments like, quote, I didn't want to be saying the wrong things, or you don't want to be seen as being, you know, wrongly. You don't want to be seen as being ungrateful or causing a stir as a freelancer, because I think you are. And especially in the current climate, you're acutely aware that these are the people that are hiring you. And someone who's moaning a lot, you don't want to hire them. People were worried that they might be misunderstood, thought to be, quote, making a fuss over nothing or creating problems. There was a concern about seeming negative to people one might still be working with or would need to work with in the future, or whose feelings one didn't want to hurt. You know how hard everyone else works, and you don't want to come across as critical, especially when you're so junior to someone senior. And you know that dealing with challenges from the execs and the channel and legal and all those sorts of things. You don't want to come across like a junior just whining about the things that were hard. Despite some self-censorship, of this kind, most participants reported having taken the opportunity to provide some form of feedback to the company, and this was generally reported as having been a positive experience. It felt really good to share what I found good about the company with the hopes that that was something that they'd know benefited people and potentially would continue with, or, you know, try to continue funding, etc., etc. Early concerns about the possibility that this aspect of the intervention might raise serious personnel issues proved to be unfounded. On a couple of occasions where this could have happened, the matter was already being dealt with by HR. Generally, any problems raised had, as one facilitator put it, been, quote, really easy stuff to fix. The third-party role of the facilitator being outside of the bubble of production was considered absolutely essential in this aspect of the conversation. I was grateful that it was a third party. There's not a lot of complaints, but I did mention two things. One of the things I wouldn't be comfortable saying if it wasn't confidential. Another, I've been able to let go of a few things I've been thinking about in that I've told someone now, so I don't have to mull over. I don't have to ruminate over that anymore, even if nothing really comes from it. The value then was in highlighting areas for improvement, in simply getting things off one's chest, and to feel that one's opinion actually mattered. Facilitators had conveyed a sense of genuine interest in the participants' feedback, be it positive or negative, and this had been appreciated. Quote, I felt like my voice was really valued and they were really taking on everything I was saying. Another, They do want to listen to us, and they do want to know what kind of feedback we have so they can, try to make things better. The headline finding of this pilot project then is that the intervention was universally well received by both participants and facilitators. Having said that, not everyone took up the offer, so one might expect that those that did so would come to it with a more positive mindset. I asked participants to summarise their thoughts on the overall experience of the intervention and whether they would take the opportunity again if offered. The response was unanimously positive to both questions. The experience had left them feeling, quote, more openly supported, quote, valued as an individual, and less like, quote, a cog in a machine or just going through revolving doors. To me, this upbeat response in many ways seems disproportionate to the modesty of the offer. A meeting that generally lasted little more than about 20 minutes, with some associated administration that might amount to an hour per person of the facilitator's time. So this is very light touch. One of the striking recurring themes to emerge from all these interviews, which might explain this, is the sheer novelty of the experience. I've been working in TV for 10 years and I've never had that. One participant summed up her feelings like this. It's a two-way street, isn't it? The companies need freelancers to work for them to make these programs. And as freelancers, we want to work for companies, but we want to also feel valued. So I thought that that was a really positive experience and something I would definitely look to do again. I'll end with this image because I find it both sobering and hopeful. Sobering because it's obvious that what's needed here is a properly irrigated system, and a tiny drop of water is not a systemic solution. But hopeful too, because it represents the possibility of change even in the most challenging of environments. Change is in everyone's interest, employer and workforce alike. Sustaining this industry depends on sustaining its workforce. To me, at least, the image is a helpful reminder that where water is encouraged to flow, the most arid of landscapes can sometimes be transformed. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard. Can I ask the first question?
Of course.
So that guy that we saw interviewing people at Fremantle, what
Yes.
was his role? Which department was he in?
That's a very good question, and he may be in the room to answer this himself. Ewan, are you here?
He is.
Do you want to explain if you are?
Well, he was. Yeah, he is. He's got his microphone off, but we can't hear him.
Okay, I'll start.
I've got it now. Sorry, yeah, I was double mic'd off. Yeah, I was working in the global entertainment production team, and so the global entertainment basically look after all the production companies that are around the world that Fremantle work in, 28 countries with about 38 companies. And so my role was the director of FM Reach, which was like a people project. And this was formed part of that project. And so I was dealing with like the UK as if I would dealing with Australia and Indonesia and all the other territories that I used to work at. And it was to think of ways of doing stuff differently with people or with freelancers, and how we could do different opportunities and bring a different dynamic into the company. And so when Richard's offer of doing this project came about, that's why I snapped at it.
Thank you very much, Ewan. Does that mean then that you're part of the HR department in the organisation?
No, so I was part of the production part. And so
Right.
What we found is that, and also Vic Roy, who was the person who took over this project when I left Fremantle, she was part of the talent team,
Right.
not part of the HR team.
Yeah, I think that's quite important. I think
We did try it with HR at Neighbours. So when we went to Australia, we did this through HR. So it can work through HR, but my preference would be, my recommendation would be ideally the talent team, because they know the show, they know the way production works on the ground, but they're arm's length from any of the kind of issues or concerns. So someone in Ewan's role and somebody in Vic Roy's role was perfect.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else got a question? A few of you here now. Got a question from Tamsin. Hello, Tamsin. Nice to see you.
Hi, everyone.
Hi,
Hi,
Tam.
Richard. Nice to see you all. Yeah, thanks for that, Richard. It's really interesting. I guess my question is, did any grievances come up through this process? And how was the organisation equipped to respond to that? Like, if somebody actually had a specific grievance relating to, I don't know, workload or discrimination or anything else?
So I was arm's length from that because I wasn't involved in any of these conversations. I was having research interviews after the event. So I have no insight or knowledge of anything that arose other than what was fed back to me in the course of these kind of research interviews afterwards. My impression was that issue arose only twice. And in both cases, HR were already involved. So it didn't affect this supportive offboarding conversation at all. It did delay our the intervention on one show. So we were going to do this at a particular moment towards the end of the show, and we had delayed it by a few days because there was an issue that was being sorted out. But I don't know any of the details of that. I don't know if Ewan wants to add anything. I don't know if he was still around at that point anyway. But basically that as an issue for the intervention didn't arise because anything like that was being sorted out by HR, basically.
And I think with the actual conversation and the way it was pitched when we were emailing the individuals to say, do you want to get involved in this supporting offboarding? I think it didn't feel very HR-y to say, you know, if you've got a kind of a big problem, tell us. This was a bit more, as Rich said, it's a bit more kind of about them and more of a light touch. So the grievances wouldn't come up through this process, because I think that was signalled quite well in the email conversations we had with the individuals before they had the chat with us.
Thank you again, Ewan. Peter.
Hi, Richard. Thank you
Peter.
very much. That was really insightful. Can you hear everyone hear me? Am I on?
Yeah, can hear you well.
Yeah,
yes, nice to meet you.
Likewise. I hope we're going to speak more in the future. I'm going to speak just now as somebody who's very recently been supporting someone who's being bullied on a major public service broadcaster show, and has a lot of insight as a senior producer and director in the industry. And the first thing, I think it's absolutely key that Ewan was not involved in production in the sessions that you conducted. I think that's absolutely key. But I have certain observations to make. And one is, my overriding thought is, how do you factor in budgets and independent production company profit margins and the necessities and the urgencies and the intensity that those create? Because fundamentally, I don't believe that broadcasters pay what it costs to produce television. And the next thing is, has already been touched on by Tamsin, which is grievances. Because often, and I have lots of decades of anecdotal accounts or testimonies to back this up, is that a lot of the conflict and the strife that occurs in television production is caused by bad management from the people above you and incompetency. And so the idea of reporting back to somebody who's not good at their job is a non-starter for many freelancers. And I think somehow, while this is vital research, I think it would be good to factor in those elements somehow, because I think that anything that is shared in these feedback sessions will be mediated by the freelancers through an absolute fear of being blacklisted. And I know you know this, Richard, and I'm sure many of the other people know this, but the blacklisting in television is shocking. And I've worked on many productions, and I can back up a lot of the testimonies that you've been given, Richard, received about the lack of, literally, I've had an executive producer look me in the eye at the end of a very hectic 3-week shoot and just smile and walk off. That's what it is. So this is really important. And the last point I want to make is, you're obviously working with a big company here in Fremantle across lots of different, got a stable of indies. And one of the big problems is a lot of companies, I'm going to state the obvious, don't have HR departments, don't have anyone who can provide this kind of feedback or institute this. And I know this is a starting point, and I know this is a launch pad, so please don't, I'm not being critical. I think it's really, really important work. But how can this translate to smaller companies, And I don't know if you've given that any thought, or that's one for down the line.
No, I've certainly given it thought, Peter, but they're very astute observations that you've made, that you're absolutely right. My primary concern with the project I've done with Fremantle was to test it as an intervention. Could it work at all? Because I was open to the possibility that it was just a waste of space and I should just leave it all behind. So what I wanted to do was just establish whether it was a thing before trying to make it work across the board, as it were. So that's really as far as I've got, because I've really only tested it within the context of Fremantle. It's been partially adopted, or interest, more than interest, has been expressed in it by the film and television charity, because they want to see something like it relate to the toolkit, which I'm sure you're aware of the work they're doing. But this is exactly a sticking point, because they're saying whatever we offer as part of the toolkit has got to be something that a small company can do under their own resources, and nobody wants to resource anything extra. So I think it is a problem. I don't know what the answer is. I'm hoping to test it if it with some smaller companies, get some feedback. That in a way is my next step, really. If you've got any thoughts, I'd be lovely to hear from you.
Well, that's all brilliant. I totally take all that on board. That's perfectly reasonable. And you've got to start somewhere. And I really do think this is pointing in lots of really good directions. And I think maybe one thing, we can talk about this separately another time, but one idea is how would you bring the broadcasters into the fold? Because while obviously freelancers are employed directly by production companies or in-house occasionally, places like the BP and Channel 4 are about to up their in-house production game, reading about that this morning, which I'm sure a lot of indies are a bit worried about, or whether that's through investing in companies or through their own production department. But I think they have a role to play in this as well, because they set the terms and conditions of the commission. And I'm a great believer in the fact that they could do more in terms of my own future research that I'm about to embark on, that they could do more to, just set the tone, the style, but also implement the structures that you're exploring, and film and TV charity are as well. Because having just had a very long conversation with an advisor from the film and TV charity only last week, I know full well of the brilliant work they're doing and the hundreds of freelancers that they're supporting in terms who feel they're being bullied, and that is the tip of the iceberg. You only have to go on some of the industry freelancer Facebook groups or social media groups to see the level of despair that's being felt at the moment, and that's through lack of employment, job insecurity, bullying, and the fear of being blacklisted, which is a very, 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 very real thing in television.
Can I just ask whether Ewan wanted to add anything to what I say, because I'm conscious that I'm answering in an area he might have a view on.
I think that with this with the size of companies and things like that, like we're working with Richard on this project for a long time now, and even after leaving Fremantle, and I think the appetite of some small companies is there to do something, kind of, Peter, and to get involved, and they've seen kind of what it like. We've got conversations with some small companies that are very small, but they want to be part of it. So again, it's that appetite of, if you want to be part of something and you want a different approach, then this is a kit that you can get and just take. It's almost like off the shelf. I can take it and then bring it into my different company. So I think it's it's an interesting thing. But if companies want to resource and take care of their freelancers, which they've got to start somewhere. So I think this intervention is a good one, and it was good to test it. I know, obviously, with the size of a multi-billion-pound company like Fremantle, but the actual individual kind of labels within Fremantle are small, small labels as well. So we could test it in those different ways.
I also agree. That the buck stops with the commissioners. I think that is something that does need addressing, seriously. Sorry.
100% agree with that, Richard. I couldn't agree more. And because, again, when I make broadcasters, aka usually commissioners, because that's the point of contact, although I think business affairs have a role to play as well, because there's a disconnect, as I'm sure you're aware, between the editorial side of a broadcaster and business affairs and the contract that's negotiated, and then, of course, what production companies take out of the budget, because not all of it goes on the screen. And I think what's important to me about your research in this this project is that it points to increasing the level of accountability of production companies and broadcasters with regard to the welfare of freelancers. And as I hope it grows and it filters down to smaller companies, and they have hopefully the means to have somebody who's not directly involved in production to facilitate these sessions, that it will just raise the basic awareness in everybody, especially of the execs, about, again, the accountability in terms of the welfare of freelancers, whether that's career development or actually their mental and physical health.
Thank you, Peter. Shall we come to Heidi?
Yeah, we've got time for one more, I think. So Heidi, over to you.
Oh, thank you. I'll try and be quick. Hello, everybody. Hi, Ewan and Tamsin, who I know. I've just got a quick question, because I've been doing a lot of work with freelancers, but not necessarily just the freelancers working in the production as production crew and production workers, but also the freelancers, like, for example, dancers who will go through layers of different. So they're hired by the company, but they're sort of hired by the choreographer. So there's an extra layer of people that they need to make sure that they don't upset within that. And I just think this is just such a brilliant initiative, and I'm trying to wrap my head around, because there's a lot of bullying and there's a lot of problems with these people who aren't held to account because people are frightened to hold them to account, but partly as well because there's layers, and we see it regardless of the size of the organization, because HR doesn't really mean anything if you're only on set for like 2 days and you're in rehearsals for a week somewhere else off-site in a rehearsal studio, and then that's it, you're done. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts about how it might translate or could be transferred to the wider community of freelancers that help to create this work and these programs.
I think that's a brilliant observation and question. I mean, the honest answer is not. I haven't really got much of a response to that. I mean, we only went for people who were on at least 10-week contracts, and many of them have been there for months. So, but I totally concede the point, and the whole layering of subcontracting, as it were, makes it incredibly difficult, doesn't it? Ewan, have you got any thoughts on that?
No, I was thinking how, that's quite a difficult. It's a difficult approach, but maybe even just having the conversations and having the questions as prompts might just go towards having a conversation, at least, compared to, because we don't want to do a full, I grew up kind of in the BBC, and we had like PDRs, we had appraisals, we had all these kind of different things. Whereas actually like this 20-minute chat I found quite transformational in the individuals when I talk to them, because actually just having 20 minutes to talk about yourself or talk about themselves and have someone who's just a bit further away to have kind of a discussion. I wonder whether, I don't think that is there a dancing union, but like if there was equity or some union type person, a bit like the film and TV charity, but for the performing arts, or maybe like, is there a performing art? Is there a dancers union or anything?
And they tend to belong to equity,
Yeah.
and there is a kind of, you can report things to equity, but people tend not to because they don't want to. They want that, you know, that choreographer could be auditioning for a theatre job like next week, so it's not always in the same. You know, it's the same with musicians, and there are other groups who, and actually actors, because that goes through the directors and the casting directors, and you don't want to get bad reputation, and etc. etc. Yeah.
Heidi, I'd be very up for having a conversation to, you know, mull that one over. But
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi, and special thanks to you, and thank you so much for coming this afternoon and participating as well. Great question from Peter and Tamsin as well, and nice to see some old friends, and perhaps start making some new ones. Thank you, Richard.
Can I just interrupt just to say, I should have mentioned that my report will be out in early June. So if anybody wants that, just drop me an email, rwallis@bournemouth.ac.uk. So yeah, if you're interested in sort of reading the full report.
We can't do this without one plug at least, so good for getting it in towards the end. Thanks, Richard. Thanks for coming, everybody. I hope you'll come to more future CEMP talks as and when they happen, and you'll subscribe to all our lists and everything. But yeah, thanks for coming, and I'll see you at the next one.